there, everyone. It's Mr. Hefner again, and I'm coming to you from once again in front of the Mark Twain Mansion in Hartford, Connecticut. We're going to get started today with our first literature unit of 11th grade American literature. It's a unit called Origins of the American Tradition, and it's anything that might be in American literature up until 1750. We're going to start back actually several hundred years before the American Revolution. But let's get started. We're going to go over the introductions here. I'm going to start screen sharing, and I'm going to get my presentation up here for you. All right. So, like I said, this one's called Origins of the American Tradition, and it's anything that might be up until 1750. So it encompasses a great deal of time. And much of the literature in this unit it's not literature that was written for entertainment. This was a period of time when a new world was being colonized and survival was more important than entertainment. So there wouldn't have been any Netflix at this time. Now, every one of these units that I have comes to you from our literature anthology, which is the American Tradition, Literature and the Language Arts. And I'm going to use some key parts of the book, but I've scanned them all into Schoology for you so that you can watch these videos or look at the scanned resources. First of all, there's always a section called About the Author. And I think it's important, especially with American literature, to understand who was writing in a certain time period. And then there's a section called About the Selection, and that's going to be the background about the specific piece that we're studying on any given day. And its context, what brought it into existence, its purpose, the effect it's had on American lit, that sort of thing. And then there are literary tools. And the literary tools are basically just those techniques that writers use. You know many of them. You've been studying them every single year. Some obvious ones are things like irony, which you probably learned way back in elementary school, character. And then we'll get into some more sophisticated ones as we move through 11th grade and hopefully even through 12th grade. And we want you to be able to use these when you discuss literature. And that's why we call them tools instead of just terms. Now, for every one of these units, I've made a unit overview for you. It's in Schoology. That unit overview will list every piece that we're going to read in that unit. It'll list the literary terms plus the definitions for each piece in that unit. There's a real short about the author that I've put in there as well, some key ideas for background information. And then at the very end of each overview sheet, you're going to see one additional piece. And that's the piece that we will see when we get to the unit assessment for each one of these units. So at the top of the overview, there's always going to be a big unit essential question. And then there are lesson essential questions as we go through. But that unit essential question is really important because in every unit, what I'm going to ask you to do is work with me through each piece of literature. And then when we get to each unit test, there's going to be one new piece of literature, something we didn't do together. That's the piece that's at the end of the unit overview sheet. And you're always going to have an essay question related to that new piece of literature. And the essay question is always going to be related to what the unit essential question is. So I want you to be able to take all the things we did in the unit and be able to, on your own, apply that to a new piece of literature. That shows me that you can use the literary tools and that every individual lesson essential question has helped you build to the big unit essential question. So our unit essential question for this unit is the one that's on your screen. What elements of style, content, and purpose are reflected in the literature of pre-revolutionary America? Many of these unit essential questions are going to be really similar in this course because we're moving through different periods of American literature. And in every period, I want you to look at the style, the content, and the purpose. So at the end of this unit, you're going to readdress this unit essential question. There's always a little bit of background, and this will probably be review. We're not going to go into great detail, but it'll probably be review for you from other units that you've done. We call the period of time before the arrival of Columbus in the New World the pre-Columbian time. And as you know, we believe that Native American people arrived on this continent from Asia. And there are different theories. Some believe they sailed from Polynesia on rafts, really advanced rafts. like the Kon-Tiki. Others believe there was a land bridge between Asia up near Alaska and North America, and that they came across that way and then spread down through South America. Each of our units is going to have a timeline to start us off. And let me grab my laser pointer here, because I think that shows up a whole lot better when I'm trying to point things out. So we always have the timeline, and then above the timeline, it's always literary events, things that were written during that time period. And below the timeline, we always have some historical events. You're not going to be tested on any of these. It's not a history class, but it's important to understand several of these in order to understand the context that the literature goes in. So if you take a look at this one, we have 1492. As an elementary school student, you probably learned that little rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, to remember that date. And that is when, for a long time, we thought the first Europeans arrived here. Today, we believe that the first Europeans were probably Norse sailors who arrived earlier than this. They didn't stay, and so they didn't become part of the records for North America. But Christopher Columbus arrives. He arrives in what he calls the West Indies. He called the people he found there Indians because he believed he had actually arrived in India, which was his mission. If you remember from elementary school, Columbus was looking for a water route to get to India, which would have been safer than the overland route. 1502, another explorer, a fellow by the name of Amerigo Vespucci, comes to the New World. The interesting thing about him is he wrote about his events, and later on, a German map maker made a mistake and believed that it was Vespucci who discovered the New World and not Columbus. And to this day, that is why the New World, North and South America, are named for Amerigo Vespucci instead of for Christopher Columbus. Vespucci kind of lucked out on that one. Moving through the timeline for the period that we're going to be working with here. Up here, you have a really important piece of literature in 1578. It is not American lit because there is no American lit just yet. Holingshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland. It was a comprehensive account of the history of the British Isles, and Shakespeare relied upon it like a Bible when he was writing his history plays. Down below here, you have exploration going on to the New World. Queen Elizabeth is on the throne. You have the British at war all the time with the Spanish. Sir Walter Raleigh comes and founds the first colony, which is the colony at Roanoke Island. That's the interesting one because the ships dropped everyone off at Roanoke Island, went back to Europe for more supplies. And when they returned 2 years later, you might know the story mysteriously, there was no one. They had all vanished. Just a mystery word. And we still today have historians trying to figure out what happened to the people at Roanoke Island. As more time goes on here, Elizabeth I dies, and she's going to be succeeded. This is a mistake, by the way. Your textbook says James VII of Scotland becomes James I. He was James VI of Scotland. Not that that matters right now. But James is an interesting guy because Henry VIII, when he was King of England, changed the religion of the country, caused an awful lot of turmoil, moved from the Roman Catholic Church and created the Church of England. When his daughter Elizabeth dies, she had no children. She was known as the Virgin Queen, and so we had to look to next in line to find who's going to come to the throne, and that was James I, King of Scotland, who by right should have been Catholic, but he converted, and he becomes the first monarch to rule both Scotland and England, brings them into one country. That's where the Union, if you think of the Union Jack, the flag and things like that, it was the union of those two countries. He's going to start some additional explorations to the New World. You have the French in Quebec, so you've had the Spanish in the New World, you have the English in the New World, and you have the French in the New World. The Dutch found New Amsterdam, later becomes New York. So now you have the Dutch, you have the, I got to go through them all again. You have the English, you have the Dutch, you have the French, you have the Spanish at this point. Around this time, the Pilgrims come to the New World, and we all know about Thanksgiving Day and things like that. The proper name for the Pilgrims is they were the Separatist Puritans, and that's going to be important because in 1642 up here, you'll see civil war breaks out in England. And later on here, you'll see that Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads defeat the Royalists. There were different types of Puritans, and most Puritans stayed in Britain. Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan, and they wanted to purify the church. They did not trust the Church of England that had been set up by Henry VIII, and they took over Parliament, and Parliament put Cromwell in power. They wanted to defeat the king at that point, those who were in favor of a royal line of succession. But there was another type of Puritans, and these were the separatist Puritans. They believed that they were never going to be able to change the church in England, and the only thing they could do was leave and start their church somewhere else. So these pilgrims that came in 1620, they are actually separatist Puritans. They came here to start a religion they believed they could not do in England. I'm going to go quickly through the rest of this because it's not going to really affect our literature in this particular unit. You can take a quick look at what's going on at this time. All right. Now, before we move on here, we've got a little check for understanding. After we do the introduction and after I give you a chance to read the background information that I have on Schoology, you always take a little check for understanding quiz before we go on. And I review most of those questions right here. So if you want to, if you're not taking Cornell notes, feel free to grab a sheet of notebook paper and a pencil and write these down as we go along. So here's your first check for understanding question. Why did Christopher Columbus call the native people in the North American continent Indians? And we talked about that. He thought he had arrived in India. He obviously was not in India. All right, how about this one here? There's a map of Roanoke Island. John White went back to get supplies. When he came back to the English colony on Roanoke Island, what did he find? Absolutely nothing. Everyone had vanished. Just one mystery word. How about this one? I didn't go over this, but you probably know it anyway. Colonies were really created to make money for people who invested in the creation of the colonies. They were almost like companies. And so every colony had to have some kind of product that it could create and ship back to the motherland. This right here, this is the product. What is that product? It's going to be something new. Yeah, that's tobacco. And he got the tobacco seeds from the Native Americans in the area and started growing it and sent that back. There was no tobacco in Europe before this started happening. It's kind of interesting. There was some research done at William Shakespeare's house in Stratford upon Avon. They're constantly digging up the garden and things like that, looking for things. And one thing you find in old English cultures when you dig up gardens is a lot of broken old pipes. People smoked, and the pipes were made of clay. They were cheap. They broke. You simply returned them to the ground where they would decompose and break down over time, and you got a new pipe. And they were actually testing the pipes found in Shakespeare's garden, and they actually found that more of them tested positive for, yeah, you're going to like this, more of them tested positive for cannabis than they did for tobacco, which is kind of funny. It may have preceded tobacco in use. And maybe that's where Shakespeare got his crazy ideas for things like A Midsummer Night's Dream. I don't know. All right, how about this one? You've got Spain, England, Holland, France, and Germany on the screen. Which one of these countries never established a colony in North America? Correct answer is Germany. We had plenty of German immigrants coming here to escape the wars in Europe, but they did not have their own colony. How about this one? Puritan ethic. We did not talk about this, and I apologize, so we can do this right now. But we talked about those separatist Puritans. The separatist Puritans had theocracy. They were a religious government, and they had something called the Puritan ethic. It was the guidelines by which you were supposed to live your life. And all of these were stressed heavily, except for one. Which one can you guess? One of these things is not like the others. Pick the one that doesn't belong. And I'm sure you picked personal wealth. At this point, it was all about surviving in the new world. And so family and community and giving to that community were most important. Individual wealth was not. In fact, many of the people who were here actually produced wealth for people back in Britain. How about this one? According to the religion practiced by the Massachusetts colonists, those separatist Puritans, what was meant by the idea of original sin. This isn't going to be terribly important to us in this unit, but it was one of the questions that your textbook publisher thought you should be able to answer. What is the concept of original sin? All right, and A is correct. They believed in their version of Christian tradition that Adam and Eve had sinned, and that therefore everyone's already born with that sin on their head, and that everyone was going to go to hell unless they found some way to be saved. And that wasn't something they believed they could themselves decide. They believed whether or not somebody was saved or not was predetermined, and that individuals had no control over that from the day they were born, but it doesn't hurt to try, right? All right. What did the separatists, sorry, that might be covered up by my little thumbnail of me. What did the separatist Puritans do? And the answer is already on the screen. They left England because they conflicted with the church. They didn't believe they could ever reform the church in England. Oh, here's another one. Answer's already up there for you. Sorry about that. But we talked about it. Puritan theocracies were governments run by religious law. So when you see theo here, all right, you have religion in there. So if you study theology, it's the study of religion. When you see this root word here, like in democracy or plutocracy, that's a form of government. So this is a government run by the rules of God. What about this? Puritan writers often used allegories to address human struggles. What is an allegory? We are going to read an allegory in this unit, but you've read allegories before. Allegories are any fable. If you've ever read a fable where animals do something and there are symbols and the animals learn a lesson and you're supposed to understand the symbols and figure out what the lesson is, that's an allegory. And so they are symbolic stories. And part of the belief sometimes with allegories is if you don't get it, if you don't understand it, you're not meant to understand it. Easy one. Who was Amerigo Vespucci? Now what's going on? We have no B up there. This slideshow is messed up somehow. Who was Amerigo Vespucci? And it's the one thing that's not there. It's B, and it should be right there under that. What happened? This is crazy. He was an explorer. He came after Columbus. He wrote about his adventures, and because of that, a map maker in Germany made a mistake, called the New World America, and it's been called that ever since. Oh, there he is. It's just the timing or the order that's out of place there. How about this one? Which of these happened first? We have Columbus arrives in America, the colony of Roanoke Island is founded, the Jamestown, that should say colony, is founded, and the Puritans arrive in Massachusetts. Which one happens first? And it is first. In fact, these are all in order for you. On the check for understanding, you're going to have to take them and put them in the correct order. This is the correct order. You can pause the video and you can write them down if you like. But that is your correct answer right there. How about this one? What distinguishes a pre-Columbian culture? Sometimes we call various cultures pre-Columbian. What does that mean? They worship nature. They're all in South America. They existed before the arrival of Columbus, or they made jewelry of pure gold. Correct answer? Yeah, they existed before the arrival of Columbus. Many of them did worship nature, but that's not what pre-Columbian means. Many of them are in South America, but there are pre-Columbian cultures in North America too. And many of them did make jewelry out of pure gold, which is one of the problems they then had when the Europeans arrived and found out, what, you have gold? How about this one? Which of these issues in American history can be directly traced to the Jamestown colony? It started in 1619. What do you think it's going to be here? Yeah, it was the slave trade. It was a group of slaves in 1619 who were actually part of a, they were part of a shipment on their way to Mexico. And the ship was captured and some of the slaves were taken sort of as a prize. And the first slaves arrived at Point Comfort on a Virginia peninsula and were taken directly to the Jamestown colony. Slavery is going to go on for about 250 years in America after that. Historians generally believe that the first Europeans to arrive in the Americas were what? Norse sailors, Amerigo Vespucci and his crew, They believe that they landed at Roanoke Island or that they were accompanied by Columbus. What do you see as the correct answer there? And yeah, we believe that they were Norse sailors. They simply didn't stay, and so their visits were kind of temporarily lost to history. That's going to be the end of our introduction. Tomorrow we will get started with our first piece of literature in this unit, and we'll spend about a week and a half on the first unit. It's a pretty short one. So if you have any questions, you can always send me questions in Schoology. I'm always here for you guys. Thanks for staying with me till the end, and I'll see you soon.